Imagine a scenario for a second. You're looking at a company, and they just hit a valuation of $1.4 billion.
Okay, that's a pretty massive number.
Right. And they successfully raised $400 million in an IPO. And the institutional demand to get in on this was, I mean, it was absolutely massive.
Yeah, everyone wanted a piece.
Exactly. But now imagine that this exact same company has 0 approved products to sell.
Wow.
And because they have no approved products, they have 0 revenue.
It sounds like a complete paradox on paper, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, to anyone outside of this specific sector, throwing over $1 billion at a pre-revenue company just looks like a massive mistake in the market.
It totally defies traditional business logic. You aren't buying a finished product here. You're basically buying time and, you're buying data.
Right, time and data.
But that is exactly what is happening right now in the biotech space with a company called Kardigan. So the mission of our analysis today is to really decode this hype.
It's a fascinating situation.
It really is. Like, why would anyone, let alone Tier 1 institutional investors, take a $1.4 billion bet on pure probability? And what does this entire situation mean for you as someone navigating the future of healthcare and specifically the future of cardiovascular medicine?
Well, to really understand the mechanics behind that valuation, we have to lay down the foundational truth of this analysis right up front.
Okay, lay it on us.
This is not your typical growth stock story.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're looking at a tech company, an IPO usually means they have a software product, they have active users, and they're just using that capital to scale up their market share.
You're pouring gas on a fire that's already burning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in the biotech world, an IPO is absolutely not scientific validation. It's basically an advance payment for future evidence.
An advance payment for future evidence? I like that. So the market didn't buy a commercial pharmaceutical company.
No, they didn't.
They bought a public countdown. They essentially funded the runway required to enroll patients, run the clinical trials, and, figure out if the underlying science actually holds up in human biology.
Precisely. Which really brings us to the science itself. Because to understand why investors are willing to pay such a steep premium for probability, we have to look at what Kardigan is attempting to do differently than the conventional cardiovascular model.
And this represents a structural shift in how we think about the heart. Kardigan's core thesis argues that heart disease isn't just one monolithic condition.
Right, which is how it's historically been treated.
Yeah, like in the conventional model, you could have 2 patients who share the exact same diagnosis. They both have heart failure. They both have the exact same symptoms.
But underneath it all,
right, the underlying biology, the actual microscopic mechanism that's damaging their individual hearts, it can be completely different.
Yet, the conventional medical model treats them the identical way. It treats broad symptoms across massive, generalized populations.
Just a one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. You have high blood pressure. We administer a pill that systemically lowers blood pressure. You have a weak heart. We prescribe a medication that reduces the overall physical strain on the organ.
It's treating the symptom, not the cause.
Right. And Kardigan wants to flip that entirely. They're focusing on precision cardiology. The goal is to identify the specific biological mechanism causing the problem, select the exact subset of patients who have that specific biological defect, and build targeted therapies that hit the root cause.
Okay, let's unpack this. Conceptually, it's like taking your car to a mechanic who actually fixes the specific engine defect, rather than a mechanic who just tells you to drive slower so the engine doesn't overheat.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, the conventional model just tells everyone to drive slower. Kardigan wants to replace the exact faulty spark plug. But if we're being analytical here, we've seen this story before.
Oh, absolutely. Many times.
A company isolates a target, they fix the spark plug on a cellular level, but the patient still doesn't get better.
This raises an important question, and it really is the central tension of the entire precision medicine thesis. Finding that specific defect, what we call a biomarker, does not automatically equal better patient outcomes.
It's a huge distinction.
It is. Targeting the root cause is incredibly powerful medicine when it works, but it's extremely dangerous investing before it is proven. Like, a drug can successfully change a biomarker on a lab test, but if that patient doesn't actually live longer or feel physically better, the FDA is not going to grant regulatory approval.
Which means betting on biomarkers is a huge leap of faith. And because precision medicine requires highly specific targeting, this analysis has to look at the actual clinical bets being placed. Kardigan is staking its entire existence on 3 experimental therapies.
They're essentially $3 billion bets running simultaneously.
Wow, no pressure.
Right. The first, and by far the most critical, is a drug called danicamtiv. This is the primary valuation pillar holding up that $1.4 billion price tag.
And danicamtiv targets genetic dilated cardiomyopathy.
Yes, exactly.
For anyone tracking the space, dilated cardiomyopathy is a disease where the heart physically enlarges and weakens, drastically reducing its ability to pump blood throughout the body. But Kardigan isn't targeting everyone with this condition, right?
No, they're being very specific. They're zeroing in on patients who have highly specific genetic variants, specifically the MYH7 and TTN variants.
Got it. So what do those variants actually do?
Well, those specific genetic variants compromise the heart muscle's contractile machinery. They affect the actual physical movement of the muscle fibers. So danicamtiv is engineered as an oral cardiac myosin activator.
So what does this all mean for the patient's actual physiology? Mechanistically, how does tweaking that contractile machinery translate to a patient who, previously couldn't walk up a flight of stairs?
We think of the heart muscle like a massive rowing team trying to move a boat.
Okay, a rowing team.
Yeah. In a healthy heart, all the rowers are pulling their oars in perfect synchronization. In a patient with these genetic variants, it's as if half the rowers are asleep or their oars are broken.
So the heart simply cannot generate enough force.
Precisely. Danicamtiv works on a molecular level to essentially wake up those resting rowers. It increases the availability and function of the myosin motors, meaning the heart can contract with significantly more force without requiring the body to consume more oxygen.
That's wild. It goes right to the structural source of the weakness rather than just managing the downstream fatigue.
Exactly.
But as you established, this is still an unproven probability. Danicamtiv is currently in the Kinship DCM study, which is an adaptive, randomized trial.
And that word adaptive is crucial here.
Here, so.
Well, in a traditional trial, you set your parameters, run the test for years, and only look at the data at the very end. An adaptive trial means they can look at the data midstream and pivot.
Oh, I see.
For instance, if they see the drug is working incredibly well for patients with the MYH7 variant, but failing completely for the TTN variant, they can adapt the trial to only enroll MYH7 patients going forward.
That's huge. That saves them millions of dollars and potentially rescues a drug that would have otherwise failed a broader trial.
It does.
But the execution has to be flawless. The clinical signal has to be durable. Like if the drug works for a month and then the effect fades, that valuation resets to zero.
No, it plummets overnight. Which is why biotech companies rarely survive with just one asset. To hedge that risk, they have a second program called etesiguat.
Okay, so if danicamtiv is fixing the cellular motor, etesiguat is targeting the physical plumbing. It focuses on moderate calcific aortic valve stenosis.
Yes. In this condition, the body inappropriately deposits calcium onto the aortic valve, which controls blood flow out of the heart.
And how is that currently handled?
Currently, the conventional treatment pathway is incredibly passive. Doctors basically just monitor the patient as the valve gets stiffer and stiffer, waiting until the disease becomes severe enough that the patient requires major open-heart surgical intervention to replace the valve.
That is a terrifying reality for a patient. You're basically sitting in a waiting room until you're sick enough to risk surgery.
It's awful.
Yeah.
And that is the exact paradigm Kardigan wants to disrupt. Etesiguat aims to address the calcific remodeling itself.
So it's not just a Band-Aid.
Not at all. Mechanistically, it doesn't just lower blood pressure. It activates specific biochemical signaling pathways that essentially tell the body to stop depositing that calcium.
It stops the valve from turning into bone.
Exactly.
But the challenge here goes back to our earlier point about biomarkers versus outcomes.
Right, the central tension.
Even if they prove on a scan that the calcification has slowed down, they still have to prove that the patient can function better.
Yeah.
Does slowing the calcification actually delay the need for surgery?
If they can prove that clinical benefit, it completely rewrites the standard of care. But you're hitting on the exact risk profile of the company. And that brings us to their third program, tolomarsen, which targets acute severe hypertension.
And our analysis of this specific asset reveals a much muddier picture.
Muddier is putting it mildly.
Yeah, so tolomarsen is a once-monthly therapy targeting angiotensinogen, which is a protein produced in the liver that drives the entire system regulating blood pressure.
And the target population is patients who have just been hospitalized for severe hypertension, which is a highly unstable, vulnerable period.
The biological logic seems sound, right? Target the liver protein, lower the blood pressure. So what actually happened in the data?
Well, in their earlier study, known as Cardinal, The drug successfully reduced its target biomarker. It did exactly what it was engineered to do on a molecular level.
Okay, that sounds like a win.
You'd think so. However, the actual clinical outcome, the reduction in the patient's systolic blood pressure, did not mathematically beat the control group.
Wait, if the drug successfully knocked down the biomarker, why did the patient's blood pressure improve more than the placebo group?
Because the placebo group experienced an unexpectedly prolonged improvement in their own blood pressure.
Really? Just on their own?
Yeah. When you put a patient in a hospital setting, give them standard of care treatments, monitor their diet, and force them to rest, their blood pressure often drops naturally.
Of course.
The control arm improved so much that Tonelmarsen couldn't statistically prove its added value. It just highlights how difficult cardiovascular trials are to run in the real world.
Here's where it gets really interesting. You're looking at 3 highly complex, unproven drugs. One requires a flawless adaptive trial, one has to prove it stops a valve from turning to bone, and one just got lost in the noise of a placebo effect.
It's a lot to juggle.
It is. Does launching a 3-front war actually help them? Or does running 3 distinct clinical programs just spread their capital and focus too thin? Like, you could argue that 3 paths to success are just 3 different ways to fail.
That is the ultimate debate surrounding this valuation. Having 3 programs mathematically reduces single-asset risk. If Denecamtiv fails, the company doesn't immediately dissolve. They still have 2 assets alive.
Which is good for survival.
Sure, but it simultaneously creates 3 massive clinical budgets, 3 distinct regulatory labyrinths, and 3 separate opportunities for market expectations to completely break.
So, given the mixed data on Tonelmarsen and the astronomical costs of running 3 simultaneous trials, why did institutional investors aggressively push this IPO to 25 million shares at $16? Why hand them a $400 million war chest amidst all this biological risk?
What's fascinating here is that the demand wasn't entirely based on the raw molecules. It came down to inherited credibility.
Inherited credibility.
Yes, the pedigree of these specific assets and the pedigree of the executive team running the company.
So these aren't just random molecules cooked up in a lab last year to hype an IPO.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Denecamtiv was originally discovered at Myocardia and further developed by Bristol Myers Squibb. Acesiguide has deep developmental roots connected to Sanofi and the Mayo Clinic.
And Tonelmarsen.
That was licensed directly from Ionis. They're inheriting decades of institutional knowledge, prior safety data, and intense scientific scrutiny.
And the team itself brings a massive halo effect. Some of Kardigan's leadership previously helped develop a major cardiovascular drug called mavacamten while they were at Myocardia.
Yes, they did.
That drug was so successful that Bristol Myers Squibb bought Myocardia for roughly $13 billion.
They proved a highly targeted heart therapy could navigate the FDA and reach the market. Investors are looking at that $13 billion precedent and betting that this specific team knows how to run the playbook a second time.
Yeah, past performance doesn't change cellular biology. I mean, a brilliant executive team cannot force a flawed molecule to succeed in a double-blind trial.
Biology always does what biology wants.
Yeah.
But what experience does provide is a drastic reduction in avoidable execution errors.
Like unforced errors.
Exactly. A seasoned team knows how to design the clinical trial endpoints so they don't accidentally fail on a technicality. They know how to engage with the FDA early, how to select the exact right patient cohorts, and how to scale manufacturing.
Which is huge.
It is. The IPO market is selectively reopening, and capital is flowing toward teams that have visibly de-risked the operational side of drug development.
But operational perfection only gets you the IPO. As our analysis clearly outlines, cash sitting on a balance sheet does not equal clinical progress. Cash simply buys data.
And clinical stage biotech companies consume a staggering amount of cash before they ever see a dime of commercial revenue.
And Kardigan's research and development expenses more than doubled in a recent quarter, which makes sense because their trial activity is expanding rapidly across all 3 programs.
Right, they were burning through it.
So that $400 million IPO looks like a fortress of capital today, but it's really just a ticking clock. It absolutely does not end the financing question.
No, it just delays it.
More trials mean higher burn rates, and higher burn rates inevitably mean they will have to issue more equity to raise more money in the future.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this outlines the central financial mechanic of the biotech industry. Dilution, issuing more shares to raise capital, is the normal, unavoidable cost of developing medicines.
But the timing of that dilution dictates everything about the company's future value.
Everything.
Put yourself in their shoes for a second. Imagine the pressure. If Kardigan releases undeniable positive clinical data on danicamtiv, their stock price surges, right?
Oh, absolutely.
They can raise another $200 million by issuing a very small number of shares. They maintain all their leverage. But what happens if Tonlamarson disappoints again and Atasiguit needs an extra year of testing?
Then the leverage totally evaporates. If they burn through their $400 million and are forced to raise capital on weak or delayed data, their valuation will have plummeted.
And that's the nightmare scenario.
It is. To raise that same $200 million, they would have to issue massive amounts of new stock, severely diluting their existing shareholders. They might have to give away half the company just to keep the lights on.
Which means every single clinical update over the next 12 months isn't just about science, it's about protecting their cost of capital. You have to measure their cash pile against their upcoming catalysts.
Right. Can they actually advance all three programs to decisive readouts without compromising the execution of their flagship drug?
The bull case, the optimistic scenario, is extraordinary, though.
It really is. If danicamtiv successfully validates precision treatment in genetic heart failure and Atasiguit proves it can intercept valve disease before a patient reaches the operating table, Kardigan suddenly owns multiple, highly differentiated cardiovascular franchises.
In hindsight, a $1.4 billion entry point will look incredibly cheap for a platform fundamentally changing heart disease.
But the bear case looms right alongside it. Danicamtiv fails to show durable benefit. Atasiguit lowers a biomarker on paper, but doesn't actually improve the patient's physical stamina. Tonlamarson remains trapped in placebo noise.
And meanwhile, the cash burn accelerates, forcing punishing dilution on the shareholders who bought into the IPO.
It's a high-wire act. Bringing all of these threads together, we want to look at how investors will actually judge this company over the coming year.
Right. Rather than viewing this as just a massive financial event, you have to watch how the underlying metrics play out in real time.
First, the market will demand proof of danicamtiv's durability. Does the biological benefit hold up over months of treatment?
And simultaneously, they'll be scrutinizing Atasiguit to see if slowing valve calcification actually translates into functional patient outcomes, not just better scans.
They also have to prove that Tonlamarson can cut through the noise and produce a clear clinical signal that actually beats the hospital placebo effect.
And hovering over all of this science is the financial reality, their cash burn efficiency. How ruthlessly are they converting that $400 million into decisive data?
And when they inevitably return to the market for more financing, does that dilution happen from a position of strength or desperation?
That is exactly how to read this story. You can't just look at it as a $1.4 billion valuation or a replay of the team's past success with mavacamten.
No, it's a massive, highly public test of whether precision cardiovascular medicine can produce repeatable clinical and commercial value.
The company has bought the time, and investors have supplied the capital. But an IPO in biotech is never the finish line.
It's simply the moment the clock starts running in public. The science still has to earn the valuation.
And as we wrap up this analysis, it's worth zooming out from the financial mechanics. If Kardigan succeeds, and they truly prove that precision cardiovascular medicine works on a large scale, the implications are staggering.
It changes the entire paradigm. Could we be looking at a near future where major heart disease is no longer treated as an inevitable mass-market lifestyle condition?
Right, like what if we stop waiting for the heart to fail and instead start intercepting these diseases years earlier, treating them as highly specific genetic malfunctions?
We finally stop handing out generic advice to drive slower, and we actually start rebuilding the engines on a cellular level.
It would fundamentally rewrite everything we know about human longevity.
It is a profound shift in medicine, and the data over the next few years will tell us if we are finally there.
Something to keep a close eye on as this plays out.